a MAGA revolt, both online donations, but politically and professionally, her life would have been very difficult. So what they decided is that they need to make a stand on Hegseth, because I think Hegseth was also very different than Gates. Gates, it appears, had at least 4 or 5 different no votes that were against him, but Hegseth only has 1.
Gates,
so you really only had to flip 1 person.
I mean, Gates had a lot of, he had worked with these people.
Right.
And they knew him personally and disliked him.
Right.
Pete didn't have that.
Yeah.
You know, so there wasn't this like personal animus against him that was animating some of the, I think, Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, exactly. And then also, I mean, Pete Hegseth actually is a warrior in the MAGA kind of online circles in a way that Gates is, but then he didn't have the same baggage that the Congress was carrying with Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz also, you know, look, Pete Hegseth may have 1 accuser or whatever. Matt Gaetz has got a whole ethics thing that would have happened. He would have had to go through an FBI background check. I mean, that was a whole other level of salaciousness and of scandal that could have followed him for a while. I think that those 2 things were really what sunk him. With Hegseth, I mean, look, you know, it's like you can believe him or not, but at the end of the day, it's like 1 person, you know, that we're talking about here in terms of the settlement and then some of even the drinking allegations. Like, again, I'm just not going to take it seriously from some people who are blasted all the time. That doesn't mean I condone his behavior. You shouldn't drink alcohol, especially if you're in very high positions of power. But, you know, it's like, again, to be tit-tutted by senators, some of whom I know personally and I've seen get pissed drunk, and Capitol Hill reporters, it's just so aggravating to me. But anyways, the real thing is that with Hegseth, they decided to make a stand because they know it's not just about Hegseth at this point. If they capitulate there, then that means that Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. are now in trouble. So what's interesting is if you saw, Joni Ernst tweets out a photo just yesterday of her meeting with Tulsi Gabbard, right? Just being like, okay, basically a peace, you know, with the process. Another one was Kash Patel, because they were a little bit worried about him because of the people on the Judiciary Committee, people like John Cornyn and others who were on the fence about what exactly was going to happen. So I feel like relatively confident. I'll give him a 65, 70% shot that he'll probably eventually get confirmation. Something else could come out. It's certainly possible. But at this point, they decided to make a stand. And so it does look like Pete Hegseth has a decent enough chance to become the next Secretary of Defense.
So I think it's been fair to report on all the personal stuff, especially in the sensitive role. You worry about blackmail, you worry about what else could come out, et cetera. So I'm not saying that that's illegitimate, but Michael Tracy's been making a very good point about this, which is all this focus on his drinking and his love life and all these things has either distracted or just the media is not really that interested in what his actual ideology is. And so Michael Tracy, as he does, has been digging deeply into things he said over the years about, you know, his supposed positioning as a quote-unquote recovering neocon, when this evolution happened, is it legit, et cetera. And I really recommend, I could put this piece up on the screen, I really recommend this piece to you because Michael Tracy listened to his speeches, read his books, watched his podcast appearances to try to track his actual evolution, if he has indeed engaged in some sort of an evolution, because he's sort of painted as this, you know, America First revolutionary who's going to have this completely different ideology and position the American military and, you know, potentially sort of roll back American empire, et cetera. And there isn't a lot to really base that on. He came to prominence for his Iraq War advocacy. He was, you know, a leader of groups that their whole mission was to promote candidates who continued to back the Iraq War. He, you know, in the Ukraine war, continued to support this. Like, his position was Joe Biden was not being hawkish enough vis-a-vis Ukraine. Now, again, these are positions that he's switched on. But I also think it's important, as you said before, Saagar, like, okay, after the fact, after consensus congeals and it's safe, it's one thing to oppose the wars. It's another thing to have opposed these wars when it was difficult and when it was unpopular and when it perhaps went against the grain of your party and your peers. There's no record of that with Pete Hegseth. The other thing is, even with regard to Iraq, it's hard to pin down when he actually decided that he was against the Iraq war. And judging by the public record, his conversion on the issue came after people like Jeb Bush, Hillary Clinton, certainly, Even John McCain, who, at the end of his life decided this didn't really go all that well. Apparently, according to Tracy, Hegseth, in a podcast appearance last month with Sean Ryan, was asked, should we have been in Iraq? At that point, he replied, I was a huge proponent of it at the time, but in retrospect, absolutely not. I've been a recovering neocon for 6 years now. So if you do the math from 2024 to 6 years prior, that would be roughly 2018, being generous, that he had this final evolution with regard to the Iraq war. So all of that is to say, just in terms of the ideology, he has kind of the vibes and the brand as some sort of revolutionary and is going to have this very different approach. And I think there's a lot of reason for skepticism about that when he has taken the neocon position, even up to and including the Ukraine war.
Yeah, look, I like Pete Hegseth. I think he's an ideological warrior. I think the case for Hegseth is kind of the way that you would look at any opportunistic politician who wants to be on the right side of an issue. He may not necessarily get there originally, and he may do what is quote unquote in vogue at the time, but if it's the popular consensus, he will be there. And because of his television presenting skills, he's actually very skilled at being able to switch positions and making not seem all that incongruent. I don't think he has a real ideology on national defense. And look, I'm trying to be kind here, but the truth is like the guy seems to be a bit of a follower, right? On Iraq,
Fair.
on Ukraine, on everything, kind of gets dragged to where the base is and all that. It doesn't seem to have any like hardcore convictions. The only real hardcore convictions he has are a general orientation that the Pentagon and the War Department itself no longer fight wars in a way that we are able to win. I'm fine with that. As long as that is your orientation, we can get you to the right place, Just listen to some of the good folks. J.D. Vance is very supportive of him, at least in terms of some of the discussions that they have had. So if Pete Hegseth does become the SecDef, I think there are a couple things that we're going to see. One is he will not be, quote unquote, pushing his own agenda. That's very different than what I think Marco Rubio is going to do or a Mike Waltzer are going to do. These are ideological neocons who have really not changed a lot of their position and who will take orders from Donald Trump, but a lot of the other stuff in the interagency process, that is going to be very much at their discretion. Under a Pete Hegseth, I don't think that that's the case. I think that will be very much like he's going to do whatever he's told to do. I'm fine with that. The other thing that I think Pete Hegseth will go after, which I support, again, is the entire military bureaucracy, which he has long been at war with, specifically the 3- and 4-star general class, who are basically just HR bureaucrats now at this point. It relates and has overlap with DEI, but it's still very important for people to understand because it's way bigger than that. We're talking about basically an elevation of Lloyd Austin is the prototypical person who rises in the United States military at this point. This person was a CENTCOM commander under the Syrian rebels program and admitted a complete failure and the funding of al-Qaeda. He is then given the job because he's black, basically, to become the Secretary of Defense by Joe Biden, and then does nothing for 4 years. Has America been very successful militarily? Has the Pentagon become more ready for war under his leadership? Absolutely not. If anything, you actually see a lot of morale figures in the military. Recruitment is way down. A lot of the reasons are because of obesity, but a lot of the people don't want to join anymore. You have a crisis of patriotism, a crisis of recruitment. Morale, apparently, amongst the rank and file is terrible, has been for 4 years. A lot of that had to do with COVID. I think Pete will be the most popular SecDef with rank and file members in like a generation. It's been years since you had anybody who, maybe Mattis initially, but of course, later on turned a little bit against Trump. I think he will be truly beloved by a lot of the rank and file. And this is somebody who actually did fight. So it is interesting to watch people, and I saw an article about this, I think it was in the Journal. It was called like the disgruntled veterans, and it's people like JD, Tulsi Gabbard, and Pete Hegseth who have what the key is that all of them fought at a lower level whenever they were, basically entry in the military and formed a general orientation. Neocon and all this other stuff is the wrong way. Well, the way I would say it is feeling failed by your leaders. And that's why I think if you look at Pete's past, one of the reasons that Donald Trump wanted to pick him as the VA secretary was, again, because of his popularity with the rank and file. But don't forget this. He went to war for people like Eddie Gallagher and a few others who were accused and convicted of war crimes under the UCMJ, and basically got Donald Trump to issue them a pardon. And he's been somebody with the Concerned Veterans of America who has pushed a lot of action about PTSD and others for people who have been deeply affected by their service. So to me, it's kind of like it's kind of like Luigi Mangione. Because I guess swim in these circles, his political orientation makes total sense to me. But